Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another webinar organized by South Asia Research Institute for Minorities. I'm Faiqa Lakho, your host for today's event. I would like to thank all the well-known speakers who accepted our invitation to participate in the webinar. We are joined by Dr. Guzel from Geneva, Mr. Florian from Germany, Mr. Ruki Fernando from Sri Lanka, Professor Sujatha from India, and finally, Ms. Naumana Suleman from Pakistan. Thank you all for joining us today. We believe that human rights pertain to all aspects of life, as their exercise enables everyone, despite of which caste, color, and religion they believe, to shape and determine their lives in liberty, equality, and respect for human dignity. Human rights encompass civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights. The responsibility of ensuring these rights lies on government and concerned authorities, as they are obliged to respect, protect, and fulfill the rights of every individual. However, the contemporary world, especially South Asia, is witnessing dire state of human rights violation of minorities, as they are considered as marginalized community of state and are excluded from the mainstream of the country. Therefore, on the International Day for the Rights to the Truth concerning gross human rights violations and for the dignity of victims, SARIM has invited speakers from different parts of the world who will focus on highlighting the alarming state of human rights violation of minorities and to raise voice against discriminatory practices. To begin with, I would like to invite Dr. Mehmet to share his views on the pathways for peace building for minorities in South Asian region. Dr. Mehmet is founder and president of the Center for Peace and Reconciliation Studies, Geneva. He was nominated 3 times for Nobel Peace Prize in 2019 for solving the statelessness problem of all minorities in Myanmar, in 2017 for providing the legal solution for the West Papua conflict, and in 2014 for finding unlawfulness in Article 140 of the 2005 Constitution of Iraq, which is legitimized cause of another civil war by the reports of Secretary General of the UN to the UN Security Council. Over to you, Dr. Mehmet.
Thank you very much, and it's a great honor on my side to be with you. When we are talking about the minority protection, in fact, we are talking about, in vice versa, fears of the states. I mean, when we are looking for the self-determination right of the peoples subject to the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, for the right to self-determination within internal concept, it is an individual right. Why I do say it, because before the formation of the United Nations, the League of the Nations Minority Protection System, a self-contained minority protection system. It's a collective right subject to the member states of the League of Nations, but subject, not collective members, subject to the newly established states or for the states who gained a new territory. This was not for France, United Kingdom, and it's not a basic right for their colonial places. I mean, then we are talking about South Asia to understand the discriminative policies of the European states. And in the United Nations, in the beginning, there is no collective rights of the minority protection system. Everybody is talking about civil and political convention, but this is an individual right, and the rights given for the individual petitions. In fact, it's an alert system in the UN system for discriminative policies on collective measures, and then we come to the Declaration of Indigenous Peoples and the Declaration on the Minority Protection System. Now, what can be done is the most important point. Let's try to understand the fear of the states. When we understand the fear of the states, this is sometimes the basic point for the future acts of the states. In fact, in all the world, the states act the same. I can give you an example. When I work on the minority protection of the Turkish population in Western Thrace, and when you say that Greece is a European country and is a member of European Union. I solved the citizenship problem of like 60,000 of people, because Greek put out of 60,000 of Turkish people, they said that there is no Turkish minority, there is Islamic minority, but this is against the peace agreements, and it is null and void, the policy. And now if they open a court to the European Court of Human Rights, they can regain their citizenship. And this is the same problem for Myanmar when I solved the citizenship problem, subject to the decolonization agreement. But when we look at the general policy of the states, especially after decolonization, like Myanmar, like Sri Lanka, like Philippines, and the problematic decolonization process of India and Pakistan, the states have different kind of fears within themselves. And mostly the generation after the decolonization were much more affected a strong unilateral one strong nation policy against their minorities. And sometimes it returns to taking a concept of taking revenge, especially in South Asia, because the colonial power always used minorities as a Trojan horse to control their hegemony. And it's a cheap way for them to use minorities, and they created hatred, like what has happened to the genocide in Rwanda. I mean, when you look at the origin of the genocide, you cannot take it for 3 or 5 years. It is something like 200 years of discrimination, 100 years of discrimination, and using the minorities against the major ethnic power. I mean, you cannot imagine in Myanmar, the official language in the post office was Hindu, and they transferred the Hindu population. And this hatred comes to the civil wars as of today. And when we come to the concept of civil wars, even if there is one country, there is a civil war, all the states are alerted. And when you look globally for the situation of minorities, if there is a minority problem in any part of the world, the states are alerted, and they got into same concept of acting. And when we look at the concept of acting of the states, it doesn't matter which continent they are, they do act the same way. They try to change the demography of the state with the major population. And when there is a guerrilla movement, which is terrorist, designated or terrorist or not, there is enforced disappearances. I mean, this is the same case in all parts of the world. And sometimes the people who got the monopoly of representing the minorities are the main cause after the ongoing problem of the conflict. And they are the ones preventing reconciliation and peace process and their dignity for the future. I mean, now it becomes a position, chicken, egg, chicken position. I mean, when we look at the root causes of the problem and the discriminative policies of the states in any part of the world, sometimes the people who got the monopoly of the representative of the people, of the minorities, today become the cause of the main problem. I can give an example for the Rohingya representation position. Before me, they were asking their citizenship rights. When I solved the citizenship problem with a higher system within the UN Charter, they stopped asking it. And they asked for a UN-secured return back of all the refugees. It seems a very, how can I say, innocent word. But when you say UN-secured return back, it means humanitarian intervention, not peacekeeping. Humanitarian intervention of the United Nations against the military of the Myanmar. And when we talk a humanitarian intervention, it costs money. And it costs some billions of dollars. And it costs so many soldiers to be deployed for the humanitarian intervention. It means in practice, they said that we do not want a solution. Maybe this is the policy of some other states, but you cannot solve it. I mean, when I ask for non-fighting zones in the living space of the Rohingyas when they are to return back, and this is a call for Arakan Rohingya Army and Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army. The representatives of the Rohingyas refuse to give a call like this. Then how can the other states are to send, make pressure on Myanmar for their return back into an ongoing armed conflict? So they prefer not to do anything, and they just opened a symbolic court with the help of Gambia, the Islamic states. And the result will be nothing, because the result, if returned to the International Criminal Court, will be just prison, to make prison of some people. So there is no solution. And if they go to the International Criminal Court on ethnic cleansing for the proof of racial discriminative law, which is null and void within the UN system, they can have a chance for the future return back of the refugees in a different sense. So we came to an understanding of what we can do in positive way to solve the problems. There is so much alarm inside in the South Asia for the racial discrimination policies, because most of the states are young. I mean, when they are young states, they say that they have got a long way to go to create their unity. And to create a unity is not an easy thing. Let's look at Spain. I mean, the independence movement of the Catalans with the demanding of self-determination referendum. In Europe, how it is criminalized and the people are put in prison. This is happening in Europe in this century. And let's look what is going on in Ukraine. The Ukraine war is something unbelievable. As for the human rights defenders, it is it alarms that there will be much more human rights violations in every part of the world. And if we are talking about South Asia, there will be much more discriminative policies of the states against their minorities. Now, I don't want to give the examples of so many problematic states, but in a way, I am now maybe to be involved in an armed conflict in South Asia on peace reconciliation studies. And I'm working on Sri Lanka, for example. In Sri Lanka, if I want to give an example, there is no genocide. Genocide has a special intent, or specials. If there are the human rights violations, this is something other. And if there is no genocide, the problem is other. And this is also for Xinjiang. I'm a Turkish person, but the Turkish minority living in Xinjiang in China, there exists no genocide. But if the people goes on a wrong definition, like a doctor giving a wrong decision of the illness, we cannot get any solution. What I would like to say is, now, what we can do within the UN system. Other than UN system, we do not have any other thing. And in the UN system, it is a locked system, I can say, for the protection of minorities. It must come to a very bad position unless a country or a humanitarian intervention can be made. But South Asia, it costs money. It cannot be any humanitarian intervention like Kosovo, because you have to send carriers, you have to send a navy. And so let's forget that the system that is established in Europe for the humanitarian intervention can reach no solution. Then we need to create the mechanism of dialogue for solving the problems. And the states, they don't like dialogue. The UN mechanism, for example, Universal Periodic Review, states can make recommendation and a state can accept it, but at the end, it will give nothing. So we are in a way of very locked system. And if for the name of sanctions people ask for, when it will affect the daily life of the majority of the nation that makes the discriminative policies, then the hatred will become higher. And the state policy will be favored by the major ethnic group. And we have to understand the political psychology of the other people. I mean, when I am working on Sri Lanka issue, the terrorist organization LTT, today still live and alive and they want to take the control of the monopoly of the system. And some people, in the name of being a human rights defender, define what has happened as a genocide without a special intent. You can define it as a war crime. But when you define it as a genocide, which was not real, it becomes a hate speech within the community in a small island. And you cannot reach anything. And these are the basic points. And if you have got questions, I'm happy to answer. But I would like to say, for the minority protection for the future, we need the dialogue. And within a large system of the world, within the UN, we need to find other ways of communication to solve the problem. And we have to take into consideration of the fears of the states.
Thank you so much, sir, for highlighting very important points. And let's say what other speakers have to say in this webinar. So our next speaker, thank you so much, Dr. Mehmet. And moving towards our next speaker. Our next speaker is Mr. Florian. He is lecturer at the Department of English and American Studies, University of Potsdam, Germany. Mr. Florian will talk about how German foreign policy enables the human rights abuse. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Florian. The floor is all yours.
Thank you so much for having me. And yes, my small contribution is titled Human Rights and Bhima Koregaon 16, a German perspective. And perhaps to initially clarify my own stake in this, so one of the persons whose homes have been searched within this case, Satya Narayana, who teaches at IFLU in Hyderabad, he has taught me, so there's at least some personal connection there. People like Hani Babu, Shoma Sen, Varavara Rao, they're friends of friends. So I cannot claim to know them personally, but they have been arrested and they're friends of friends. So there's at least some personal connection there. And actually, I forgot to share my screen. So I have prepared a couple of slides for you so you are able to perhaps better keep track of what I'm saying. Okay, now you should be seeing my presentation as my video slide. So if you can kind of enlarge my tile, then everybody will be able to see what I wrote there. So as I said, human rights and Bhima Koregaon 16, a German perspective. So in this talk, I will be advancing three claims. The first is that the Elga Parishat case shows a colonial mind split between Dalit and Hindu nationalist interpretations of the historical events. The second is that the central government is using the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act to bypass the judicial system in order to silence and kill dissidents. And among these are human rights defenders, of course. The third claim is that the German government is complicit in these human rights violations by lending international political credibility to the RSS as well as the BJP regime. Followers of Hindutva in civil society and the Indian government are working to curb freedom of expression in India. Opponents of the Modi regime are routinely targeted over their views and statements, and lynchings of Dalits and Muslims by self-appointed Gau Rakshaks have become a violent reality after the BJP election success in 2014. The fabricated Elga Parishat case around Dalit self-assertion in the state of Maharashtra illustrates a particularly heinous instrumentalization of the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act against human rights activists, lawyers, journalists, academics, and anti-caste activists who are critics of the regime. To this day, 16 of them have been incarcerated and are collectively referred to as the Bhima Koregaon 16. The Elga Parishat or Bhima Koregaon case's significance stems from a colonial mind split, which is identified with the village of Bhima Koregaon. From today's Dalit perspective, the victory pillar erected there by the British symbolizes the victory of an oppressed, quote unquote, lower caste, over their quote-unquote upper caste oppressors. It stands as evidence against alleged caste inferiority. More recently, it became the center of an annual show of self-assertion among Dalit neo-Buddhists on the anniversary of the battle that is celebrated with much reference to Ambedkar as a role model and his emphasis on education as a way to combat caste oppression. But the event and the monument play an important role in Dalit ideology that centers on reclaiming human dignity and fighting for social equality. The colonial mind split is an underlying ideologically motivated conflict between the Dalit and Hindu nationalists' ways of remembering. The ethno-nationalist perspective interprets the Maratha Empire, who fought there, as an indigenous anti-colonial force by virtue of having fought against the British East India Company and the Muslim Mughal Empire, both of which it depicts as colonizers. This conception of history dictates, as opponents to a nominally anti-colonial power, the Mahars who fought there as quote-unquote lower castes, acted morally reprehensible by fighting on the British side, which serves as reason to quell any balanced discussion on the subject. More than that, the Maratha Empire and its Brahmin Peshwa ruler are charged with meaning as a proto-national formation. This is an ahistorical claim, but it dovetails with established casteist conspiracy narratives that portray Dalits by default as quote-unquote anti-national, and as a suspicious internal other for historically prioritizing their social and economic equality over national self-determination. However, the term national self-determination is misleading in this context, as it implies that Dalits were meaningfully sharing in the post-independence Indian nation state. Falsely positioning the Maratha Empire as progenitor of the modern Republic of India strategically exploits post-colonial sensibilities around the nation as an unnegotiable universal moral good. This tactic creates a strawman argument that distracts from the underlying question of caste discrimination and the fact that Dalit equality has not been achieved in the quote-unquote upper caste dominated nation state. At the same time, the change of lens from caste to nation conveniently advances a narrative in which the quote-unquote upper castes can maintain their moral integrity by selectively remembering themselves and their caste communities as victims of colonialism, rather than as perpetrators of caste discrimination and the concomitant systemic atrocities to dehumanize Dalits. It puts different victimhoods into competition, with the result of invisibilizing the caste angle against the overwhelming importance and moral value attributed to national independence. This provides Hindu nationalists with a discursively powerful yet argumentatively weak default strategy to, at least superficially, immunize themselves against criticism by reverting to the nation as an unquestionable good. The imprisoned Bhima Koregaon 16 are caught up in this ideological battle arising from the colonial mind split over supposedly anti-national Dalit politics, which is fought with threadbare reference to national security and the specter of the urban Naxalite. They stand falsely accused of being Maoist insurgents and having incited caste-based violence in connection with an event organized by the Elga Parishat coalition on 31st December 2017, after which violent altercations between Mahar and Maratha caste troops ensued in Pune. The case against them thus unites caste antagonism with a conspiracy narrative about an internal other that is combined with the historical figure of the ultra-left Naxalite, who is connected to Dalit politics and somehow poses a threat to the state. To make the case fit the scope of the UAPA, which was originally designed as an instrument against terrorism, the prosecution alleged that the first to be arrested, Sudhir Dawale, Surendra Gadling, Mahesh Raut, Shoma Sen, and Rona Wilson, were also part of a conspiracy to assassinate Prime Minister Modi. This false charge has since been extended to all the Bhima Koregaon 16 to discredit the accused by default as enemies of the state and leverage public opinion against them. Quote unquote, evidence for the alleged conspiracy to assassinate Modi in the Elga Parishat case was recovered from electronic devices belonging to Rona Wilson and Surendra Gadling. Several digital documents have been introduced to substantiate the claim that they were part of a Maoist organization planning to kill Modi. In response to these allegations, the legal teams of Rona Wilson and Surendra Gadling hired US-based digital forensics firm Arsenal Consulting to examine digital copies of the storage devices that had been seized in raids on both the accused's homes. The findings of the forensics analysis contradict the prosecution charges. Over a number of reports, Arsenal Consulting details how their computers had been infected with the NetWire remote access Trojan, which was then used to plant incriminating documents on their computers. And Rona Wilson's mobile phone has additionally been attacked and infected with the Israel-based NSO group's Pegasus spyware that has also made the news some time ago. While the NetWire remote access Trojan is commercially available for purchase, the Pegasus spyware may only be sold to governments after approval by the Israeli authorities. And this speaks for direct involvement of the Indian central government in the surveillance and manipulation of the Bhima Koregaon accused's devices. The Union government took center stage again by appropriating this case after a non-BJP-led coalition came to power in Maharashtra. And I think this again speaks to the fact that they're trying to retain control over the case. So far, only two of the accused, Baravara Rao and Sudha Bharadwaj, have been granted bail after years of incarceration without trial, and in conjunction with the NIA prosecutors vehemently arguing against releasing the prisoners, if only temporarily. This goes to show that the UAPA is now deployed to detain critics of the regime indefinitely by denying them bail. It stands to reason that the policy of arresting and incarcerating critics of the regime during the pandemic and then delaying the judicial process is a form of extrajudicial punishment that intends to kill or at least silence the accused without trial. One of the 16 accused, Jesuit priest Father Stan Swami, has already succumbed due to his incarceration. Although other prisoners were being released under the pandemic conditions because of overcrowding, he was arrested on 8th of October 2020 and put in jail. He was denied bail multiple times and unfortunately died on 5th of July 2021, aged 84, of a COVID infection, diagnosed on 30th of May, following a delay of treatment for 10 days. By abusing the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, the central government effectively circumvents the judiciary so that punishment is directly imposed by the executive branch. This makes any civil rights safeguards that had previously been in place obsolete, leaving human rights advocates, scholars, activists, and regime critics absolutely vulnerable to the criminalization of dissent. Stan Swami thus became the first of the Bhima Koregaon 16 to be killed extrajudicially. He was put to death by means of the state apparatus, infinitely delaying the process rather than rendering any verdict. With the NIA that is answerable to the central government having taken charge of the case, it is doubtful that he will have been the last. And I realize that it is easy for me to point to the Indian central government from abroad. So I would like to express my deepest respect and solidarity to those human rights and Dalit rights activists in India who are putting words into action every day in the face of such repression. But I also want to introduce a measure of self-reflection by way of briefly addressing how German foreign policy tolerates and enables this human rights abuse. The example of Walter Lindner, German ambassador to the Republic of India, whom you can see on the right here, tragically illustrates this. On 17th of July 2019, Lindner visited the headquarters of the Hindu nationalist RSS in Nagpur and became the first ambassador to publicize this. There he took photos with depictions of Nazi-inspired ideologues, Hedgewar and Golwalkar, and met with the current RSS chief Mohan Bhagwat. Not only did he do this in his official capacity as ambassador, but he also actively publicized his visit and face-to-face meeting with Bhagwat on Twitter. So, I mean, this is exactly the Twitter post that you can see on the right here. Among other things, Lindner's tweet shows him readily posing with the RSS chief. He also euphemizes the RSS by using a double negative to describe the fascist-inspired organization that had been banned multiple times as, quote, the world's largest voluntary organization, though not uncontroversially perceived throughout its history. It strikes me as highly ironic that in an interview with The Hindu, responding to the criticism raised internationally, Lindner said, quote, the RSS is one part of the mosaic that makes up India. This metaphor operates on a notion of cultural diversity into which the RSS is falsely integrated, as well as Enlightenment ideas about quote unquote objectivity in the sense of informed, impartial decisions that can only be made when a full picture has been assembled. The irony of Lindner's metaphor lies in the fact that the RSS is not looking to integrate itself into this mosaic, but actively tries to destroy it. So until this full picture has been assembled to the diplomat's satisfaction, he lends credibility and recognition to the RSS as a political institution by openly engaging with it, and thus making it politically as well as socially acceptable. Once the full picture has been assembled, there might be no mosaic left to understand or at which to marvel because it has been plastered and painted over in a unicolor saffron. As a representative of German foreign policy, Ambassador Lindner provides an international stage for the RSS and, by extension, the ruling BJP by actively recognizing and legitimizing the organization and its ideologues. Germany shirks responsibility in favor of neoliberal priorities centered around trade by not recalling Lindner from his ambassadorial posting. The government gets away with legitimizing fascists in the interest of business and ignoring the Bhima Koregaon 16, in part because the German mainstream press simply refuses to take notice. In many people's minds, India remains an Orientalist construct made up of yoga, veganism, and Gandhian nonviolence. However, the problem is that as a perceived authority on fascism, as a country that has supposedly dealt with the shadows of its past, Germany signals the RSS cannot be that bad. The danger this holds is, of course, that other countries will follow suit and endorse the parent organization of Hindutva, whose ideology enables the current crackdown on human rights activists. The Australian High Commissioner Barry O'Farrell and the former acting US Ambassador Atul Keshab have already met with Bhagwat in November 2020 and September 2021, respectively. For me, this goes to show that human rights are a truly global concern in the sense that there is always more than just one government to be scrutinized. Thank you.
Mr. Florian, you have walked us through a detailed timeline and highlighted the major concerns and points about the issues of Dalit and also about the inspiration behind the German foreign policy. So thank you so much for sharing your views. And now I would like to invite Mehwish James, the another host for today's webinar. So over to you, Mehwish.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Faiqa, and good morning and good evening, everyone. Well, I'm going to introduce our next guest. She will be talk about the efforts of regional and international organization in eradicating the human rights violations of South Asian minorities. Ms. Naumana Suleman, she is a human rights professional, researcher, trainer with 2 decades of work experience. Her area of expertise are international human rights law. She has been involved in the designing and carrying out human rights advocacy initiatives at different forums in Pakistan, United Nations, and European Union. She has 7 human rights publications on her credit: the Heidelberg University, Germany, and the Liberty of Congress, USA, including her research on needs of for peace building in Pakistan. In their digital libraries, she has been a speaker and facilitator at several regional and international consultations and conferences. She is the first ever minority woman who served as a advisor to the UN Women Pakistan. She contributed articles for the Daily Times, Humsab, and Naya Daur. She earned a master's degree in political science from University of Punjab, Lahore. She is a graduate in peace and justice studies from the John B. Crock School, and she has been a Rotary Scholar at the University of San Diego, California, 2014 to 15. She is alumni of the International Visitor Leadership Program 2011 of U.S. State Department. At present, she is working as a South Asia coordinator with the Minority Rights Group International. Ms. Naumana, unmute yourself. Over to you, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mehwish, for the kind introduction. Thank you so much. It has been very interesting to listen the other speakers and to have to share and learn from their knowledge. I would like to highlight the things which are happening, particularly in Pakistan, besides other countries, as I was asked to. The thing is that the historic events and things, we have already know these things, how the things have worked in South Asia and what has been the history of the minorities in South Asian region categorically. When we talk about the minorities or their rights, so most of the time, besides the ethnic or linguistic minorities and other categories of minorities, the religious minorities are the ones who have been facing a lot of challenges and discrimination throughout the region. In whichsoever country you have a look, and you would find that, okay, whosoever is in minority and categorically in a religious minority, so their basic rights or their human rights or their respect or their dignity, it is being challenged. You can take example the situation of through some incidents, the situation of religious minorities besides other minorities in Pakistan. Same goes the situation of minorities categorically, again, of the religious minorities happen to be in India or in Bangladesh or in Sri Lanka or in Nepal. So my talk, I would like to focus more on, because the plight we all know, we can have a lot of details over the media, through news and all this stuff. But the thing is that how we can probably overcome, and if we or the states, the South Asian states would like to overcome the challenges being faced by their own citizens. I happen to be from South Asian region as well, and witnessing those discrimination, in fact, experiencing those discrimination by self. So that gives you a very broad spectrum to understand the whole agony and the whole situation, starting from your day-to-day life and then ending up into your social or political or your cultural or other aspects of your life. So I think we as they can do is, and they should definitely do is, first of all, of course, if there is a will of the state, then definitely things can be changed, because we all know that, you know, state has all that infrastructure, state has all that power, and state has all these things which gives them that duty as a duty bearer to change the status quo, to ensure their citizens' right and to fulfill their right. So if we talk about the social inclusion categorically, the objective of this session, what I read from your email, was that how we can include them socially, we can integrate them socially. I think it's a very, very imperative question. We must try to address this question, because when you speak during last 2 decades, I have got experience while working at the grassroots level, working with the communities by themselves, working at different top and mid-level duty bearers and all that stuff, that if you want to change it, we have to create those programs. We have to create that conducive environment which gives them that kind of confidence once again in their governments, in their states, that they would be there to protect their rights. They would be there if someone is going to give them any harm. They won't be standing behind the abusers, or they won't be discriminating with them. So for instance, if you want to include them socially, you have to have a multi-dimensional approach and several programs at several levels to involve them. It not only means that you have to include them socially, you have to give them economic empowerment as well, because they are being marginalized, they are being put out of that circle or the mainstream of the society. And besides that, you have to integrate them in their political system as well. So if we look into the situation, for instance, last year I did a research for Institute for Development Studies. So that was with regards to the minority communities, categorically for the minority women in Pakistan. So the thing which we came up with was that the minorities, they themselves are of course facing discrimination. Then when you happen to be from a minority community, and on top of that, if you are a woman, then that jeopardy becomes double and triple, and the layers going on adding up on it, because you are a woman in a patriarchal society, then you happen to be from a minority community, and then you happen to be from a poor strata of the society. So there are several layers of jeopardy in this regard. So there are minority within minority. So they need also special attention, special focus at South Asian level. Through one of our partner, South Asia Collective, we have done and research on the situation of religious minority women in different South Asian countries, which would be up on the South Asia Collectives and MRG's website soon, at some point in next month. So that would be something which people would be able to read their different situation, because when we look into the data or situational research, we find a lot of work and research, which I do appreciate a lot with regards to women. But when it comes to the minority women in the region, then we find, you know, very less number of research or a number of data available, or how their lives are going on and how they are facing several jeopardies and what their social status is. They are being facing discrimination and patriarchy from the society in general. Then in their household or in their communities, because the men are same part of the same society, so they are also being influenced by those patriarchal norms. So they have to face those double things, because they have to face religious discrimination as well in several instances. Now, when I say the patriarchal society, or they face discrimination and they are minority among minorities, it does not mean that all the men are kind of abusing their rights. Of course, there are we have several colleagues, we have several friends, we have several that kind of relationship or relatives who have been very supportive and who do work and who have that ideology and how to overcome that inequality or to work for the gender balance. So I do not mean that everyone is same, of course. So, but in majority instances, we have seen it. For instance, during that research, those women or people from the minority community, they told, okay, they are facing discrimination in their daily life. People are not happy to greet them. People are not happy to let them eat in the same utensils. If they are working as a household worker, as a domestic worker, so then they are not allowed to go to kitchens. They are being discriminated because of their faith. They are not being allowed to have enough holidays, for instance, during their religious events, as compared to the majority community domestic workers. They do get holidays as well, and some gift as well, because that is their religious festival, and several other things. So when a person in South Asian society happen to be from the religious minority community facing these kind of discrimination in their daily life, how we can expect that that person would be living in a very conducive environment? They would be very happy with their surroundings, or they would be, they are a part of society, or they are being integrated in the society. So these very kind of discrimination, because that is their own experience, their daily life experience, and then they start living in ghettos, in community settlements. So then it becomes difficult. So people are going into their own silos, and then we expect from the minority community persons, okay, they should feel comfortable, though we do know that there are good persons in the majority community, but what experience they have gained in their daily life, they won't be able to associate themselves with the that greater good, or with the people who have been living their lives, or their attitudes are unbiased towards any person or any community. So when those marginalized people, one important thing is they have to be integrated in the society in a way that they should feel confident. Because when you talk about, for instance, my colleagues, former speakers, they were talking about social fabric or the peace building things. So it's very necessary to me that you have to have multidimensional approach for peace building as well, because it can be from it can be bottom up and top down as well, because the very fabric of the society uh, is being very badly damaged. And if you want to build it, then you have to have people to people contact. We can see a lot of contribution from the South Asian community people. Let's suppose categorically between India and Pakistan, we do have the initiatives like Aman Ki Asha and several other initiatives for peace building. So the people to people contact, people to people meeting and engaging, those things have been, I think, very helpful. So people in different South Asian countries, they are the same kind of culture, the same kind of things or values, the good parts of the culture or values, what they share is something that they have, that makes them able to understand how they can move forward collectively, and to have that international perspective. Of course, at one time or at the same time, you have several identities. You can be a national of a country, definitely. You can be of course from some of the gender. You can be some of your linguistic identity, and your ethnicity, and other things. So in another important thing is that in our society, so the religious discrimination is being now mostly mixed up with the caste-based discrimination. So people, my colleagues, they talk about Dalit community. So the Dalit community members who have been in South Asian countries, so with whomsoever religion they associate themselves, they are being discriminated, whatever country they live in South Asia. So there is ample evidence where people have worked on it, that how caste has also played a role, that caste-based discrimination that is then multiplied and associated with their religious identity as well. And then people, they're facing several layers of jeopardies or discrimination because of being from some specific caste, or because of being from a minority faith group. So when we talk about the things with regards to enhancing that understanding, of course, I shared that there should be initiatives by the governments. We have seen, for instance, human rights institution as per the international human rights law being built up in our South Asian countries. But then we have also seen that how independent those institutions have been, how much easily they are being given the resources, they are giving that independence, they are being given that, they are being given that chance to work out of any political influence. So there are several things. For instance, if we have a look at international human rights law, so most of the countries, most of the South Asian countries, they are being parties to very major human rights treaties. And when it comes to its reporting or working on them or translating that very spirit into the countries, then we don't see it in that way in which it should be. The other speaker talk about the universal periodic review system. Definitely that gives us a room. So and most important thing before I conclude my conversation is that if we want to ensure the rights of citizens of South Asian states, if we want to ensure the rights of the minority groups living in the South Asian states, we have to be very vigilant, and the states themselves, they have to take upon the responsibility under their own constitutions and under the international human rights law to which they are a party. Because if they don't translate those things seriously and interpret those things seriously to the populace, to the common people. For instance, very interesting thing is that if you compare the articles of Constitution of Pakistan and the articles of UDHR, so there is hardly anything which you will find that is not similar. So they are alike, almost alike. But these things are not being translated, to the, and not brought up or shared with the common people or common person. So they would be able to understand how to work for their rights, how to utilize those mechanisms. And the most important thing is that to protect the rights of the citizens or the minorities, the governments, categorically South Asian governments, they have to expand that civic space for the people who are working for the rights of that populace, for the rights of minority, for human rights, or for labor rights, or for child rights, or for whatever set of rights. Because when there is no space, and we have witnessed it, that there has been a lot of backlash by the state actors, by the non-state actors on the human rights defenders, on different organizations, and they are not being given that conducive environment and space to work independently. So this is something I would highly recommend that the South Asian governments look at, because these civil society organizations, these human rights defenders, they are kind of giving support to the state system. So they come up with all the solutions and to work for the betterment of their citizens. So they are not in competition with state, but they are supporting the state, and the states should let them support themselves. So there should be a better future for their people, whether they belong to the majority community or to any minority community. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Naumana. You're just really impressive, and you share your personal experience with us and your suggestion, insightful thoughts. So next, I would like to invite our another speaker, Mr. Ruki Fernando. He is a Sri Lankan minority rights activist based in Colombo, but traveling extensively across Sri Lanka. He has been writing to website, local newspapers, and international magazines on human rights, including on minority rights. He has also been involved in documenting rights violations, assisting survivors and victims' families, lecturing and training on human rights, international and national advocacy. Today, he will highlight the challenges faced by the human rights defender and journalists in safeguarding the rights of minorities in South Asia. Please proceed now, Mr. Fernando.
Thank you for inviting me to speak again at one of your webinars. I will speak firstly as some basic thoughts about minorities, but then most of my sharing will be about Sri Lanka. So when we talk of a democratic society, often we think about the majority, that democracy is about the will of the majority. But I think one of the very important tests of democracy is actually how much numerical minorities and marginalized groups' rights are protected. That is the real test of a democracy. And on the other hand, key test of democracy is also how much space there is for criticism, challenging those in power. So they're basically for how much space is there for dissent. So for me, I think these two are very important as we talk about minority rights and as we talk about those who defend minority rights. And also I want to flag that when we talk of minorities, we are talking in terms of numerical minorities. And they can be ethnic, they can be religious, they can be sexual, and they can be even within a particular minority. For example, within a Christian minority, there are also dominant majorities. Within Islam as well, there are within the Islamic community as well, there are dominant majorities. So even within a minority, there can be those who are oppressed and those who are numerically a minority because of differences within a particular minority community. And Sri Lanka has many, I'm coming to Sri Lanka, the major part of my sharing. Sri Lanka has many kind of minorities. But I will focus on ethnic and religious minorities, but also I will focus on a particular law that has been used to against ethnic minorities and also rights defenders. First, I want to talk about the ethnic minority in Sri Lanka. I think many people have heard about the war in Sri Lanka. The first speaker also kind of referred to it. The war in Sri Lanka is due to the violation of political rights of the ethnic minority Tamil community in the north and east part of Sri Lanka. These Tamils are a numerical minority overall in Sri Lanka, but in the northern province in particular, they are the majority, and historically they have also been the majority in the eastern province before the demographics were changed by successive governments in the capital. All governments in Sri Lanka that have ruled Sri Lanka since independence in 1948 from the British are Sinhalese Buddhist majority governments. That is because the majority of the population is Buddhist. So therefore, we have a strange situation where the Tamils, particularly in the northern province, have consistently rejected these major political parties from Colombo, the capital, at every parliamentary election and even local elections. But still, they have always found themselves governed by these parties that they always reject at every parliamentary or local election. So therefore, they wanted a sense of autonomy, they wanted some degree of internal self-determination, and that is why they struggled for political rights, particularly in the 1950s, 60s, and early 70s. But when that was not forthcoming, they turned to a demand of separate state, and then the peaceful democratic ways of struggle became armed struggle. So in the case of Sri Lanka, when we talk of minority rights, particularly ethnic minorities, Tamils, it's very important to address the causes that led to the war. The war finished in 2009 May, nearly 13 years ago. But the armed conflict, war, cannot resolve a conflict that is essentially political, based on violation of political rights. So that is why we are still searching for a political solution to the causes that led to the war. At the same time, during the war and after the war, there have been lots of human rights violations of the majority Sinhalese Buddhist and also of the minorities, the Tamils and Muslims. There have been large numbers of extrajudicial executions, enforced disappearances, massive displacement, and these things have to be addressed if we are going to move forward to a more peaceful and more stable society. Without addressing the causes as well as the consequences, we won't be able to have a more peaceful and just society. And because many of the survivors and victim families feel that they have not been able to get truth, they have not been able to get justice within Sri Lanka through the different mechanisms we have here, they have felt compelled to ask for international assistance. And that is how the case of allegations of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and human rights violations in Sri Lanka have gone to the Human Rights Council. And at the moment, there is an evidence gathering mechanism that is in place that will probably be reviewed at the September session of the Human Rights Council. I will also come to religious minorities. Maybe this is a good place for me to say that no, ethnically I belong to the majority community, the Sinhalese, but in terms of religion, I belong to a minority community in Sri Lanka, Christian. Buddhists are the majority. So in our constitution, Sri Lanka, Buddhism, the majority religion, is given foremost place. That itself has been questioned by many people who are not Buddhist, and even some Buddhists who claim why should there be a majority, given prominence in the constitution itself? Why can't we have a secular constitution? So the feeling of many religious minorities and some from the majority Buddhist as well is that secular constitution will ensure the rights of all religious communities, whether they are majorities or minorities. And in practice as well, there has been lots of rights violations. When I take Christian communities, I want to highlight three areas of rights violations. One is during the war. The war was essentially based on ethnic lines, but there are many Christian churches that were bombed and many people were killed inside those churches. There was also many Catholic clergy who have been executed, subjected to extrajudicial executions, and also subjected to enforced disappearances. Secondly, more widely known in the last few years is the Easter Sunday bombings of 3 churches and also some hotels. So this is probably the biggest ever post-war massacre in Sri Lanka. And in the history of Sri Lanka, this is also the massacre that saw the largest number of foreign nationals killed and injured. Even in nearly 3 decades of war, we didn't have so many foreign nationals being targeted. Christians are still clamoring for truth and justice about Easter attacks, and there has not been much progress. So even early this year and also last year, there has been clamors of international assistance because there is not much hope and confidence of truth and justice coming through domestic process. The third part of Christians is ongoing attacks on churches, threats to Christian communities in different parts of the country, and the target of these has been largely the evangelical Christians. Among the different Christian communities in Sri Lanka, the Catholics are the majority, and evangelical Christians are numerical minority. And they are the ones who have faced ongoing repression. Even last month, there was an attack on churches. One church in the southern province, where the building was destroyed and the worship was disrupted. Along with Christians, people of Islamic faith have also faced a lot of discrimination, a lot of harassment in the last decade or so in particular. Their beliefs have been challenged, particularly during COVID, when the Sri Lankan government didn't listen to expert medical and scientific advice and insisted not allow the burial of the COVID dead, which mostly affected the beliefs of the Islamic minority. There has been other forms of difficulties faced by the Islamic minority. For example, the ability to wear the traditional dress for women who want to wear it. But also practices like halal food and certification of halal food. And there have also been Muslim places of worship. These were enterprises owned by Muslims that have been attacked. There have been incidents under different governments, under the previous government before that, where there have been riots in communities, leading to the deaths of several and injuries of many others. There have also been violations faced by Hindus. At the same time, I think it's important to recognize that the majority of religious communities, the Buddhists also often feel that they are under siege. They feel that they are under, in some ways, attacked and that they might face repercussions because of the expansion of minorities. Whether this is true or not is a different matter, but I think it's very important for us to recognize the perception of the majority community that they are also facing some rights violations. The third part that I want to talk about after the handful this is about the particular law for the Prevention of Terrorism Act. Now, this is a law that has been there for nearly 44 years. As the name implies, it's intended to prevent terrorism. But it was after this law was brought about that terrorism thrived in Sri Lanka. Terrorism by the state, but also by private groups like the Tamil militants, and most recently during the Easter attacks by Islamic militants. This PTA allows the government to detain people up to 18 months, and most recently through an amendment that was passed just a few days ago, up to 12 months without judicial supervision. And it becomes the normal law. The magistrate can decide whether to view bail or not. But under this law, that discretion of the judiciary is taken away. This has led to many ethnic minorities, particularly Tamils and Muslims, being detained for very prolonged periods. But at the same time, this was also used to target human rights defenders. When I say human rights defenders, many of them have been people who are advocating for minority rights. Some of them are from minority communities themselves, ethnic religious minorities, but there are also others who are from the majority ethnic religious communities who have also suffered under this particular law, the Prevention of Terrorism Act. So the human rights defenders, I talk about human rights defenders. So I think the major challenge is that the state, the successive governments, these advocates of minority rights as supporters of terrorism, as supporters of separatism, and as traitors. And the state's perception has been reinforced by some religious leaders, by the media, including private media and state media, but also society at large. Where I personally, even some of my friends, relatives, classmates, consider my activism as supporting terrorism, as supporting separatism. So I think as long as this perception prevails within the state system and among the society at large, it's very difficult to ensure minority rights. It's very difficult to ensure a safe and free space to advocate for minority rights. So my last point is that when we talk of protecting minority rights, when we talk of space for activism, when we talk of safe environment for human rights defenders who are working on minority rights to work, the majority's role is very important. While addressing legal institutional gaps are very important, I think we must always endeavor to address the majority population in trying to change whatever challenge in the midst that they are widespread, and also trying to change perceptions that the majority has about minorities. I think it is with the help and support of the majorities that can actually ensure that minority rights are protected and the space for minority rights activism is protected. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Fernando. So let's move to the other panelist, Professor Sujatha Surepally. She is a professor head of the Department of Sociology, Satavahana University. She is also a prominent activist and advocate for Dalit women's rights and adversary rights. She has been an active part of the Telangana statehood movement and the movement against the Palavaram Dam and anti-caste movement. She holds a degree, master's degree in sociology, bachelor's of education in social sciences, and has done her PhD on Dalit women's empowerment. She has written and published numerous articles on the special economic zones. She will discuss what are the primary factors or causes of the discrimination and human rights violations in South Asian region. Professor Sujatha, over to you.
I have a privilege to have being a last speaker because majority of my former speakers spoken several issues. The very first speaker was talking about the terminology of ethnic cleansing. He was mentioning, if I'm not wrong. So as everybody is talking that minorities were targeted not just in South Asia, but across the world, but in different ways. But when it comes to South Asia and religion makes a very prominent role. And here in India, post 2014, if you see, the riots are changing and strategically changing, because I don't know if the terminologies of riots and ethnic cleansing, genocide, all these were different notions and meanings. But what is happening in day-to-day life in India and South Asia to the minorities, and we are not yet to have a definition for this, because in India, if you take it, if I don't call utter Jai Shri Ram, then I may be lynched and there may be mob lynching. And if Dalit violations, I can give you a full day lecture also. So recently, 2 days back, a man was killed just having a mustache and or good looking on social media. But my question is that the other side of people who are the victims, or the violence is increasing in different forms and shapes, where we are yet to figure out, define what they are. If you see the violence, the problem with the Indian Constitution definition of minorities, if you see that there's no clear definition people claim, but Indian democracy, if you see the entire the constitution guarantees all freedoms, all freedom of speech, thought, assembly, and everything to everybody. But when it comes to minorities, for 1992 Minority Acts, it only recognized religious minorities, like we have Muslims, Buddhists, Christians. In I think 2014, Jains were added, and the largest we have Muslims with 12% and Christians with 2%. And the discrimination, how the majority religion is using that only Islam and Christianity were born out of the country's religion, and remaining all born in India. So they can be allied with Hindus. In reality, they were not. But only Muslims and Christians were the outside religious people, so they are outsiders. That is one ideology and thought which they are trying to impose. So this, but Indian Constitution does talk about religion and language, and it gives freedom of association or spreading of your own religion. But here, 2014, if you see, when first the Bharatiya Janata Party won in Gujarat, and then with the winning of Narendra Modi, we are able to see the strategic violence spreading across, like they are intruding the cultural issues of triple talaq. Now we are talking about hijab. Then they have love jihad issue. Then they have ghar wapasi, people who are converting themselves, then they are calling wapas. Then they have recent last 6 months, we are seeing that Muslim activists, women activists, or journalists who are active. There is an app in social media, that Bully Buy app. You must have seen that, taking photographs of women and putting them for sale. And then now they move to hijab, and which deliberately stopping the education is a right, of course, a fundamental right, and they're stopping in the name of hijab. And hate speech anyway there. In last elections, I think 58 politicians had a hate speech among against Muslims. And if you see the CAA Act, and which where majority women came out onto the streets and fought, I think from there Muslim women are also targeted. See, if it is a majority issue and a minority issue, then 12% of Muslims are not really that small number. Then if you see the Dalit and Adivasis make up 25%. And if we mix with Muslims and Dalit and Adivasis, of course, across women are also there. And remaining Christian minorities, this is 30 to 40% we make up. The problem coming here is we are separating the issues, separating the minorities, and evaluating. But the fabric of equality, the democracy, and the fraternity, which is at danger level in India. So, so if Dalits are targeted and killed and butchered and murdered, then the other section of minorities are not bothering. Of course, women were never bothered in this country by anybody because it's a very isolated case. In fact, in wherever there is a Gujarat violence, or in a CAA protest, or in if you see even the farmers protest in Delhi, the women were the victims, and women and children were the most affected. But we don't have that kind of integrated approach and looking into the perspective. So my point here is that democracy is in dangerous peril in India. Of course, I don't differ with Nepal, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, but today or yesterday I was seeing the happiness index. Sri Lanka is showing better, and Pakistan is better than India, of course, Nepal. So India is just going down in terms of human rights abuses, violations. But the two reasons may be because the only official party in India have lakhs and lakhs of social media pages and WhatsApp groups. Somebody was mentioning 38 lakh WhatsApp groups, and which continuously spread the hate messages, speeches, and misinterpreting the cultural values, misinterpreting Shivaji. If you take the example of Shivaji, now, in fact, Shivaji opposed the religious domination, and he was against the RSS ideology, but he was somehow manipulated. Even Buddha is manipulated. Even they are misquoting Ambedkar, because Ambedkar said against the beef eating. Ambedkar said many other areas they are misquoting Ambedkar. The first and foremost, if I'm a victim, where do I express? The freedom of expression is in danger, is completely curtailed in India. Then if you see the farmers protest, if you see the CAA protest, if you see the hijab protest, and freedom of assembly, which is given in the, as a right, that is also been taken away, because I don't have basic freedom of expression and freedom of assembly. And if you see the 2020 21 information technology rules, they have banned more than around 100, I think, apps, the China-based apps, saying that Indian sovereignty is at danger, some tic-tac, वगैरह. But if you see the Statue of Equality, which is just installed in Telangana, of the big statue with crores of rupees, every part of it made in China and brought to and installed right in India. So the information technology rules they are amending. So Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, they were amending. So if a journalist is writing something, the recent attacks on journalists in India, whoever is reporting or abusing, they were all under attack. Some of them jailed, some of them killed, some of them, facing against cases. And rights activists and writers, that several of us are facing criminal cases. Just uttering one or two sentences why this is happening here and there. And if you also see the social media posts, people were arrested over the social media post. So one way is violence is taking place in different forms and shapes through the constitutional acts, through the courts. We used to have some hopes on some courts and judgments and lawyers, but now, if you see now at present, we are not seeing any space. Total space is completely shrinking, And even if we want to connect with the international activists and agencies also, and there is a severe, monitoring mechanism, and just labeling you are a terrorist, you are an anti-Hindu, you are an anti-Indian democracy. The definition can be elaborated. Anything you write, anything you speak, anything you talk, if you attend any meeting, and nowadays anyway we are not getting any place either outside on the road or inside the hall to have a peaceful meetings. I'm glad that we are able to discuss these kind of these Zoom platforms are at least giving us some space. So my worry is that the attacks on minorities, we don't call it as a ethnic cleansing, we don't call it as a genocide, but what do we call when even a smallest of the small incidents or sentence is making giving them right to kill, is giving them right to stop my education, my own dressing is, my own cultural practice is stopping my education, and my own social media, our Facebook wall, that I edit my page, I write on my page, that freedom is curtailed. I think everything is meaningless for me. I feel that it's a suicidal, if not a genocide thing, it is a suicidal, I call it, because you see the injustice and you don't have a place to express. And earlier, only activists used to be on the ground, used to be targeted. Earlier, people who have association with banned organizations used to be targeted. But people like me who are only working on caste discrimination, who are only talking about human rights, who are even in the classroom, even in the academics where we are in, even our research papers and articles, everywhere severe surveillance and misinterpretation. And this is becoming very, very, put us in a very sad state of affairs. So I somehow feel that we have to find some new terminology for, if I say this, even if I slap somebody, it is a violation of right or violence. But what if I am not saying Jai Shri Ram? What if I am not wearing whatever they want me to wear? And if I am target, and what is that comes under? I don't call it, I don't feel comfortable of calling just a violation, just a violence. It is completely, something against my self-respect, my dignity, the meaning of living, which I understood, I'm educated, and I'm completely aware of my rights. And all my rights are taken away for no reason, for no, just because I'm being born as a woman or a Dalit or a minority. So I'm targeted. So this is the thing that we have to redefine and rewrite and find some spaces. If social media space is shrinking, physical space is shrinking, if my writings are misinterpreted, and if my talks are misinterpreted, then what one can do? That one thing, I think, such the talks we have to. And majority and minority, if I say that, if I born in, of course I am a Hindu, then I'm a Dalit. I was never allowed in a Hindu circles anyway. So, but when I was in Geneva for my working group of minorities, I was a fellow for some time back. So people are asking that I used to tell that we are minorities, we are social minorities, that by not being born in a Muslim and a Christian, obviously they are putting me in the Hindu religion, and where Hindus doesn't allow us, Hindu doesn't, even touch severe untouchability even today. So we have to have a special, and once you are a Dalit, once you are butchered or lynched or whatever, rapes are very common, then you are putting into the caste bracket, in the framework of caste, and it is not a very dangerous thing. Anyway, it is very normalized thing. And once you are in a religious and other terrorist kind of any name and any brand can be given to anybody nowadays. You don't need to, have a weapon and stand in the borders, because the kind of bloodshed India have is more than what we have on the borders. Everyday bloodshed, every day we have n number of. Of course, we don't have a proper reporting mechanism as well. So the violations we see differently, the perceptions fall different. If a Muslim is killed, immediately 10 fake news, 10 fake stories will come, and innocent people, because social media pages and groups, if you see the right example, Kashmir Files, if you see the film, how the going up, the signatories and the supporters are going, and everybody knows it is fake. It is built on fake history and fake values. Of course, there is a violation, but some of the Kashmiri Pandits, Kashmiri Brahmins are saying that it is fake film and it is built on the all false propagation. So I'm giving you an example. So then if you are RSS is banned not now, in 1920s, but now we don't talk about banning certain organizations, and even though they openly talk, they openly work. I'm just giving you RSS an organization, but if any extremist organization of any kind spreading hatred, targeting, should be completely banned. If India, it is becoming very difficult for the human rights defenders, even just a common man asking anything, it is very difficult to survive. So the worldwide human rights defenders network have to be built strongly, and we have to see the violations not in different frames and different pockets, because if enemy is common and their strategies are different, all the victims, all the other side minorities or Dalits or Adivasis, they have to come together on one platform and target the common enemy. The problem is now we don't have a enemy directly in front of us. We have enemy spread across different institutions, media and academics, and outside civil society organizations, of course. And unfortunately, within the communities also, they have their own elements. So that is becoming very, very difficult. So for us, Dalits and minorities in India, especially women in those communities, becoming very hard to digest things. And but still, like, India is known for the diversity, India is known for the struggles, but majority of people who are conscious about the human rights, they are also coming up, but battle seems to be very difficult. Thank you very much. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Ms. Sujatha, for sharing such powerful insights. Thank you for your participation. Moving further, I would like to invite Rimsha Shahid for concluding remarks for today's webinar. She is a research analyst at South Asia Research Institute for Minorities. Over to you, Rimsha.
Okay, thank you so much. So first, I would like to thank all the panelists for sharing their views and for highlighting the ulterior realities that has always been bricked behind a wall or being carpeted under the rug, simply not to bring it into limelight. Moreover, I would like to thank for suggesting the way outs to curb the violent practices that has been rooted in the social structures of the nation since ages throughout South Asian region. While concluding the symposium, I would like to recall certain key points that has been discussed by our speakers. Firstly, Dr. Mehmet Guzel, who discussed the pathways for mitigating the issues of marginalization, while sharing the examples of policy reformations to ensure peace in various countries like Myanmar and Rohingya,
and highlighted that conflict situation direly needs reconciliation process for building peace on humanitarian grounds. Therefore, the need of the hour is to create a mechanism of dialogue for peace reconciliation. Thank you so much, Mr. Guzel, for sharing such an informative insight. Moving ahead, the discussion then followed by Mr. Florian. Mr. Florian views shed light on persecution of Dalit minorities in India, focusing the Bhima Koregaon incidents, underlining the perspectives of Dalits and Hindu nationalists. He further discussed the concept of colonial mind split and how this lens exploited the human rights equality in the state country. And also he highlighted the certain facts regarding anti-minority laws and initiatives within India. Our third speaker, Mr. Naumana Suleman, while sharing her thoughts on the contribution of regional and international organizations, discussed that South Asian countries' minorities are categorically deprived of the basic rights. She opined that the will of these states matters a lot in forming these structures, as the minorities are being excluded from the social structure, and to ensure their social inclusion, we direly need to format a multi-dimensional approach in terms of economic empowerment, political representation, and liberty to practice their faith. Then Mr. Ruki Fernando got the stage and highlighted that the true essence of democracy is not to favor the majority, but to protect the minority. Mr. Fernando, who comprehensively discussed the minority issues in Sri Lanka, shared that the country has ethnic and religious minorities, but sadly they often face discrimination. He discussed that ethnic minorities in Sri Lanka are deprived of political rights, and that being the reason they are least represented in the political structure of the country. Moreover, the religious minorities are also the victims of human rights violation. And in last, a very substantial discussion about religion-based discrimination in South Asian region was made by Ms. Sujatha. She underlined that the Constitution of India ensures equality, liberty, and justice for all. But in practice, the minorities in India are treated unequally and are discriminated on various bases, but mainly because of religion and language. So the prime objective of organizing this webinar is to highlight the alarming state of human rights violation against minorities, specifically on the International Day for the Right to the Truth concerning gross human rights violation and for the dignity of victims. As this day specifically marks the significance of the right to the truth regarding to the vicious events that transpired, the circumstances, who participated in them, the violations that took place, and the reason behind all these events. As we all are well aware of the dismal condition of minorities across South Asian region, as these groups are continuously facing long-standing social, economic, religious, political, and cultural marginalization. But the voice against discriminatory practices usually go unheard or are being suppressed, resulting in the grave rise in tarnishing the rights of minorities. Thus, SARIM is working diligently to untangle the deep-rooted notions of discrimination and marginalization, and for that particular reason, we always try to engage potential contributors and remarkable personalities to help in advancing this cause. I would again like to thank you all for sparing your precious time for this webinar, and I hope to have your productive collaboration with you all in future ahead. And last, I would like to thank both the hosts for managing the symposium in such an efficient way, and a big thumbs up to the team of SARIM for their efforts in moving one step ahead towards achieving our cause. Wish you all a good day and good luck for future endeavors. Thank you for being with us. Goodbye.